If you're a foreign student here and you're participating in this madness, you don't have a right to do that. Maybe your visa should not be extended. Maybe it should be revoked if you're going to threaten your own classmates here or come here for that purpose.
And we begin this week's roundtable with an exclusive sneak peek of Salem News Channel's This Week on the Hill with Tony Perkins and Speaker Mike Johnson. Speaker Johnson was specifically asked about the scene on college campuses this week, the violence, and what the House of Representatives could do about it. Take a look.
You've been traveling the country in nearly a dozen states, including New York at Columbia University, ground zero of the anti-Israel, pro-Palestinian Hamas protest. Why was it important for you to go there?
As many as 200 college and university campuses had some form of this anti-Semitic, anti-Israel protest. It's a pro-Hamas protest, frankly. These are violent protests in some places. They are intimidating, harassing, threatening Jewish students simply because of who they are. The first responsibility of a university administrator is to secure the safety of their students. And if they can't do that, they need to step down. There are a lot of indicators that it's not a spontaneous student-led event at all. All the tents at this encampment, so many of them were of similar size and shape and color, as if they were imported in from some outside force to allow and to foment this kind of disruption. We're looking at very seriously reducing or eliminating any federal funds at all to campuses who cannot maintain basic safety and security of Jewish students. If you're a foreign student here and you're participating in this madness, you don't have a right to do that. Maybe your visa should not be extended. Maybe it should be revoked if you're going to threaten your own classmates here or come here for that purpose.
All right, that's a lot of tough talk from Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who actually had a pretty rough start to the week, but he ended strong, especially with that personal appearance speaking on Columbia University's campus. So let's start with you, Beverly. When you hear the speaker threaten federal funding for any college campus that doesn't get a hold of these protests, sounds like a good idea to most people, I would think.
Well, it depends on what camp you're in. But yes, I think a lot of conservatives would consider that a good thing. Here is something to consider, though. You're going to hear a lot of people talking about this being a violation of free speech. Now, I am a free speech absolutist. I believe people have the right to say anything they want, even if I find it morally reprehensible. But what you don't have the opportunity to do is hijack property, block people's access to enter buildings. You don't have the right to threaten people with your speech. And it's gotten to the point where even USC has had to change their graduation ceremonies that they have because they're afraid of the unrest. So when you're looking at this becoming violent, it's not a free speech issue anymore. It's going much further than that. I understand why Speaker Johnson is coming out and saying that the government needs to step in, because we are talking about your tax money going to these institutions where students don't even feel safe on these campuses.
Yeah, but Akash, listen, frankly, I don't understand why our federal government should be funding any of these college campuses, especially considering the kind of endowments they're sitting on. But ultimately, part of my, republicanism tells me that maybe this shouldn't be something that the Congress does, that should be the states involved in this. States need to get a handle on it.
I think it's both, Larry, which is that Congress is far too involved in college campuses to begin with. As you mentioned, we spend far too much money, far too many tax dollars currently flow to universities. We have stretched student aid boundlessly up into the middle class. It's way beyond what it was meant to be. And it clearly is subsidizing all kinds of nonsense on college campuses. And so we're badly in need of higher education reform in this country in general. These protests and the behavior of these students, I think, really just underscore that, right? There are major questions about what's going on these campuses. And as Beverly alluded to, it goes way beyond free speech. You can have even abhorrent views in this country, right? It's a free country. And these pro-Hamas protesters, frankly, do have abhorrent views. But if they're peacefully exercising their right to free speech, that's okay. It's clearly gone way beyond that. Students are being assaulted. They can't guarantee the safety of Jewish students on campus. And so not only do I think members of Congress and the federal government need to reconsider our tax dollars flowing to these campuses, but also to the extent that these are happening on public university campuses in certain states, those are state employees. When professors are on campus and other administrators, other employees, those are state tax dollars. Those are state institutions. And so by all means, state governments have a responsibility there as well to not only, again, protect the free speech rights of students, but foremost protect the safety of students, faculty, and others on campus.
Well, and it's been noted, certainly, that most of those states where we're seeing the worst protests are dominated by Democrats. They're blue states. Andy, let's bring you in here because one of the things that burns my behind, and I think it might burn those of the membership of AMAC, is that this comes at the same time Joe Biden is trying to take federal dollars to pay off people's student loans. So these are the people that I'm having to pay for their tuition. Are you kidding me?
Exactly. First, I just wanted to say good for House Speaker Johnson for calling out Colombia's president. He's looking like Speaker Johnson, that is looking like the adult in the room. He was demonstrating leadership while the so-called leader of Colombia was kowtowing to these terrorist supporting protesters.
Yeah.
Larry, it's just when you look at, I've got 2 kids in college right now. My wife and I opened up 529 accounts when they were infants. We put a little bit of money away there. Wasn't a lot, but we did it for 20 years, and we've got their college tuition covered now. And I'm not the only one who does this. But if you're going to take tax dollars and subsidize these kinds of kids and these kinds of so-called academics at these so-called prestigious institutions, it's a slap in the face of every American taxpayer and every American parent who struggled to put their kids through college, whether they saved for it or tried to cash flow it. It's obscene and it's absurd, but that's pretty part and parcel for this administration.
Yeah, and Akash, I do also want to follow up. I agree with Andy. I think it was a really strong performance by Speaker Johnson when he needed it, by the way. He also mentioned the idea that there are foreign students on student visas who are now participating in these things. And I mean, that is a federal issue. And frankly, I think that he's got a point. I hadn't even thought about it this week, but he's got a point. You're here on a student visa as our guest. Maybe you should rethink it if you're going to come here and then protest our country and protest against our allies.
Well, to be clear, I don't think Speaker Johnson is questioning anybody's right to protest. Speaker Johnson has been a long defender of free speech. He, of course, has a background in constitutional law. He's a rock-ribbed conservative, and I think he's demonstrating those principles in that interview, which is, one, again, upholding the rule of law, upholding the right to free speech. But again, yes, if you are not an American, but you're on American soil, committing acts of violence and threatening students, I think by all means, there should be some reconsideration of what exactly we're doing here. I think these are, as you note, questions for Congress, and I'm glad that Speaker Johnson is stepping up and taking a leadership role here, because again, I think he's an eloquent voice for the conservative cause. I think this is a unifying issue, not just for conservatives, frankly, but for Americans of all stripes who care about having a productive higher education system, who care about protecting free speech, but who also care about common sense values in our country. And so I think it's an important point and an important moment.
You're right. And important to draw that contrast from really the equivocation that we saw from President Biden, who barely said anything. And when he did, it's like, well, both sides have a point. Thank you, by the way, for correcting me. You're right. This isn't about protesting. This is about the violent protests, the trespassing, the violations of the law. Beverly, what about that? And listen, this is what I'm worried about. They're trying to recreate the 60s, right? And my worry is that the Republicans they're going to be Lyndon Johnson. They're going to be the man. They're going to be the old grumpy men who are saying, get off my lawn. And they're trying to instill some sort of energy and enthusiasm with young voters who really don't know what they're doing, but they just know that the grownups and mom and dad, they're always wrong. Is that what we're seeing here?
Republicans do have to be careful about this in the narrative that's out there. Now, I think one thing that does benefit them is something that you brought out already, and that these are organized events. And when you actually talk to the people who are protesting, if you ask what they stand for, they say, well, free Palestine. Then you ask, well, what is this university doing? They can't answer that. They don't even know what the word divest means, even though they talk about divesting from Israel. So I think as you dig more into what are they actually standing for, what's going on, and I think this angle that the majority of Americans feel very strongly about is that we should stand up for Jewish people in this country. I don't care if you're Republican. I don't care if you're Democrat. The majority of Americans find anti-Semitism completely abhorrent. And so I think if this becomes, who are you defending? You are defending, obviously, the values of this country, but also the people who live here, and that this type of discrimination is not okay. And so if they message this this correctly, instead of just get off my lawn, as you say, but who are we actually standing up for? What are the values we're standing up for? I think it got much further, even with the Democrat Party, because this is the far left that supports this. This is Ilhan Omar. This is not your middle of the road Democrat who thinks what's going on is okay.